I'm Michelle Morgante. I'm a Senior Public Information Officer here at the University of California, Merced. And we are delighted today to have a conversation with our newest Chancellor, Dr. Juan Sanchez Munoz. He is the fourth Chancellor of the University of California, Merced. He started with us on July 1st after a long and distinguished career in California and Houston, Texas. I want to point out that today's conversation is the first of three conversations that we will be hosting. On Thursday, there will be a conversation with the staff starting at 11 a.m. And on Friday, there'll be another conversation with the faculty, also at 11 a.m. I wish to advise you that questions have been submitted in advance. We have 1 hour to have a conversation, and we will get to as many questions as possible during that time. I also wish to point out that we are socially distanced, maintaining at least 6 feet between us. So with that, I would like to welcome our distinguished guest, Dr. Munoz. He has just arrived in Merced. Well, it's actually been almost a month now, right?
Just under a month.
Just under a month. And he comes to us with your wonderful wife,
That's
Dr. Zenaida Aguirre Munoz.
That's correct.
And the youngest of your 3 sons.
That's correct.
Wonderful. Prior to joining UC Merced, Dr. Munoz was the president of the University of Houston Downtown. And he has a distinguished career not only in academia, but serving in leadership roles with municipal and state organizations and community groups, particularly in Lubbock and Houston. Dr. Munoz is a native of Los Angeles. He received his bachelor's degree at UC Santa Barbara, his master's from Cal State Los Angeles, and his PhD from UCLA. He also served in the United States Marine Corps during the first Gulf War. And with that, I would just like to offer you the chance to say a few remarks before we start the questions.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, and everyone that's tuned in to participate in this conversation. It's a pleasure to be here and be part of this town hall and this initial conversation. Obviously, we would both hope that this would be under different circumstances, and so I'm very excited to be here. I'm very grateful to be part of the University of California again, and of course, the University of California, Merced. I've said this on many occasions. In the case of my life and my wife's life, UC altered the arc of our life, of our career. It's where we met as undergraduates. It's where we fell in love and eventually married and then continued our education at UCLA. And so I have a great affinity for the UC system and for what it's done for people like me. And you, we were both at UC Santa Barbara together in the mid-90s. And I think we both understand the important role that the UC plays in the lives and the prosperity of the state. So it's a tremendous honor to be here now, the fourth president of the University of California, Merced, and to build on what Chancellor Leland and after her, Interim Chancellor Bostrom have done, and the kind of foundation that they've created to ensure the future success of the institution and the prosperity of the region, as well as the distinguished career of our graduates. So I couldn't be more thrilled to be here, but I'm not incognizant of many of the challenges that we face during this COVID crisis. And it is certainly a crisis. There's no denying that. But even in crisis and difficulty, we have opportunity. And the one thing that I've recognized in my short time at UC Merced and in Merced, and one of the things that's been impressed upon me again during my short time is the hope and the resilience and the optimism of the people here. That I don't think can be understated. I don't think it's also divorced from the spirit and the values of the UC, to thrive, to imagine, to hope, and to be prepared to exercise the personal wherewithal and effort to realize some greater ambition and aspiration. So my family and I are immensely grateful to be here and to work alongside wonderful staff like you and colleagues. And to be a part of the amazing research that's being undertaken here, which I will tell you, in the short period of time that I've been here, I couldn't be more impressed by the ambition of our faculty, by the hope and resilience of of our staff and by the promise of our students. So I thank you again for this opportunity to meet with you and to answer some questions and to further interact with our campus.
Oh, wonderful. Well, it's such an honor to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you.
You alluded to my first question that these are unprecedented times. Given the challenges that exist on every level, what would you say are your biggest priorities for the campus?
Well, first, I think it's important for leadership. And when I say leadership, I don't, I said this very often in my career. Universities thrive not just because of a president or a chancellor or a provost, but because of a president and a chancellor and a provost and a dean and a faculty member and a colleague staff member working together toward a common purpose. And so I certainly think that together we can recognize some of the challenges, but we have to keep our eye on the prize. I was watching some vignettes, some small clips of the late Congressman Lewis, and he talked about, getting into good trouble and keeping our eye on the prize. And so we're in a little bit of trouble right now, and we need to stay focused on the priorities of the university. I think the priorities are fairly clear. They're fairly salient, and that is we need to continue our movement toward becoming an R1 research university. That's a long-term aspiration, but every year we have to make the kinds of investments and decisions to move us closer toward that goal. We need to assure our faculty and our staff that we're resilient and that we're intact, and that we're going to continue to make progress toward our goals, whether it's R1, enrollment, new academic programs, medical education, a business school, etc., that we're going to continue to make progress. So the goal would be to continue to project optimism and movement. I think obviously we need to look very carefully at our finances to make sure that we have the resources and that they're committed appropriately in order to exercise the kinds of priorities and goals that we stipulate for our campus, as well as make public in our statements to the community here and beyond Merced. We need to look at the future of the campus, right, and what it will look like. We need to work effectively with our community partners, both the city and the county. And then we need to, of course, continue to press our case in Oakland with the University of California. We have a new president, Dr. Michael Drake will become the new president, and a new chancellor. So hopefully we have that in common. I hope he is successful, as I hope I am successful here at UC Merced. And so I think those are some of the goals to communicate during this very difficult time. That is optimism, movement, progress, and ambition. And these are, I think, the underlying sort of DNA of UC Merced. And so I'm very encouraged by what we still can do, even in the midst of not being incognizant of the seriousness, both in terms of health and in terms of finances and in terms of just people's durability. We've now been going through this for 5 months. I'm talking about people just like you and I and our families. It's hard. It's hard on them, the worry, the concern. And I'd like to just reassure them that we have an abundance of strength, and together we have an abundance of strength. We will help carry them, and then they will help carry us.
Well said. What was it about UC Merced that you found most appealing when you were applying for this role?
Right. Well, as I alluded to earlier, my wife and I are twice graduates, 4 times graduates of the UC system in our family. And when I think both of us recognize that the UC afforded us an education and that was affordable and supportive, that truly altered the course of our life, and now the course of our sons' lives, all 3 of them. They would not have had the opportunities that they've enjoyed in the course of their life, opportunities considerably more generous than the ones my wife and I grew up with, had it not been for the University of California. And so the goal, my wife, who is also an academic and associate professor, was always to, in time, come home under the right circumstances. And of course, when this opportunity presented itself in California, in the UC system, in an area that I'm familiar with. I have a cousin who lives in Sacramento, and I would come up to Visalia quite often. My father, as has been written, worked the fields out here when he first arrived from Mexico. And my father was from León, Guanajuato, but also raised in Mexico City, the capital, lo que dicen la capirucha. And so he came here and he would talk to us about his when he arrived in California and worked in the fields with his brother Encarnacion, my tío Chon, and it was hard work. And my father would always say, "Hijo, puedes trabajar aquí con estos o con esto." And so he didn't say much about education. He was not really well educated at all. And my mother never stepped inside a classroom, as far as I know. She was born in a small campo. And so a small campo in a little town in the state of Mexico called Zacatecas, a little pueblito que se llama La Estancia. It was called La Estancia. And, I remember that. And I remember how they encouraged us in their own way, right, to prepare ourselves for livelihoods that would be less arduous than the ones that they had to carry out in order to raise our family. And so again, to come back and to be able to, in some small way, contribute to the system that gave us so much, my wife and I and our children, in some small way for some period of time, was just something that I just, my father, my mother and our extended family, they were people of faith, and they would talk about tienes obligación, you have an obligation, and to give back to what was given to you. And so that always resonated with me, and I carried it. And so the chance to come back and in some small way contribute to the University of California at Merced, and to be a catalyst of opportunity for others and their future was just something that I felt very deeply that I was obligated to do. And my wife was very, very supportive, obviously. And I will tell you some of the benefits. Just this weekend, we've been here 3 weeks. And just this weekend, my sister-in-law drove down from Haywood and brought my nieces. And then my niece and goddaughter, who's just graduated from UC Santa Cruz, was here at my house in Merced. And so already in just a few weeks, we've had more family in our home in a few weeks than we had in a few years in Texas. And so that's very gratifying. So the chance to come home, the chance to be closer to our family, the chance to be part of the UC family again, and the chance to be part of a wonderful community like UC Merced, like Merced, the city. I had lunch yesterday with Mike Murphy, the mayor, and we had a wonderful lunch talking about the city and the university and our futures together. I received a wonderful gift basket from our neighbors. And so all of these things were tremendously important and have proven the wisdom of the decision to come back and to be part of this magnificent university.
Wonderful. Somos paisanos. I also have family from Guanajuato. So here we are, how many years later,
That's right.
talking to each other
That's
about this
right.
brand new university.
That's right.
We're both first generation college students. What can you draw from your experience as a first gen student that you would like to share with the thousands of first gen students who attend UC Merced?
Well, that's one of the other reasons, or one of the other characteristics of the campus that attracted me. I've always made very clear that my interest was to work at universities that had very diverse populations, in particular high percentages of first generation college students. My previous institution, University of Houston downtown, had also a very, very high percentage, well over 50% first time college students. It had about 51% Hispanic students. It had a high percentage of adult students, a high percentage of transfer students. And my background as a faculty member was in the area of curriculum instruction, looking at educational opportunities. So I've always been interested in working at schools that had these sort of characteristics and this kind of profile, because I think it's important for us to understand the demographic and the constituency of students that we purport to serve at these specific institutions. I think it's significant that as an R2, a research university, when you look at UC Merced, that it really separates it from many other schools across the entire country. You look at the high percentage of Pell eligibility. You look at the extraordinary retention rate, the extraordinarily high persistence rate, not just retention rate year 1 to 2, but year 2 to 3. It's well in the 70%. And you look at the first time in college population, and you look at some of what many believe to be among the hardest to serve, educate, and graduate students, and yet UC Merced appears to be doing it better than most. That's very significant. And I remember, may remember, when I arrived at UC Santa Barbara in 1985, there were very few Latinos. I went to school with two other classmates. There were three of us. I was the only one that graduated. Now, we're still friends, and one went on to business, and one became a firefighter after the Marine Corps, but I was the only one to graduate. I saw that over and over and over. It's important to have an understanding, not a deficit understanding of first generation college students. Okay, but I don't talk about at risk. I talk about at potential, because most of the first generation college students that I'm aware of want to go to school to become educated, to procure successful careers, to help their families, to improve the lives of their mothers, their fathers, their grandparents, the uncles and aunts that raised them, their brothers and sisters, to set an example. And when we know that they come to our campus not out of a place of deficiency, but from a position of ambition, then it should be incumbent upon us to help them realize their greatest possible ambition. UC Merced is doing that much better than other institutions. And so I bring that sort of perspective of when a campus works together to ensure your success, when a campus is committed to your long-term success, and that it approaches you not from a position of deficit, but from a position both ideologically and pedagogically, a position of possibility, then you create a climate where students are going to be successful. And my interest is in all of our students being successful. Transfer students that come here, first generation college students that come here, second career students that come here, students of color, foster care students, and that we create an environment where if you have elected to apply and been admitted to UC Merced, and you have entrusted us with your education and your future, that we make a commitment to do everything possible to help you be successful, because your success isn't just your success. It's not just UC Merced's success. It's not just the University of California's California success. It's California's success and our country's success. And we need more successful college graduates.
Absolutely. As you've mentioned, being a first generation student, there are challenges that come along with that. First of all, just getting your foot onto the campus. Who were some of the role models and mentors that you had in your life that allowed you to not only get into college, but thrive there? Sure. and go on? Well,
I think it's important to have a sympathetic, understanding, and considerate and respectful staff that can answer questions that we might be embarrassed to articulate. For example, I was very aware of being poor. When you come from that kind of circumstance, you might be apprehensive to ask for help. I had trouble in some courses, and I was reluctant to reach out for help. So we need faculty and staff that recognize your potential, your drive, your ambition, but also help you to identify the services and resources that we have in abundance that will help you be successful. So I had people like, for example, this woman, I didn't keep in contact with her, but her name was Lucy Castaruda when I arrived at UC Santa Barbara and building 209. And she saw me there in a corner, not knowing what to do. And she sort of intercepted me and said, "Can I help you?" I had a woman whose last name I don't remember in financial aid changed the course of my life. I owed about $134, $35. I was going to leave college, and she told me this very simple story. She said, "Well, before you decide to leave, she said, are you going to borrow money to buy a house one day?" I said, "Well, yes, I'd like a house. Everybody else has a house." She goes, "Are you going to borrow money one day for a car, or do you have it?" I said, "No, I don't have $135, much less for a car. So yes, I'll rely on a bank for a loan." She said, "You're going to borrow money for a home one day and a car one day, but you won't borrow $135 right now to continue your education in order to get that home and that car someday." So I signed my loan and I stayed in school. She didn't humiliate me. She gave me an example that I could comprehend. And she encouraged me with great kindness and support. Don't let this small amount compromise your much greater possibilities. And she was right. We need people like that. So whether it's Lucy or this woman, Linda, in financial aid, or in my case, I had faculty members that were very important. Chris Gutierrez, who was my co-chair of my dissertation when I was at UCLA, who's now a faculty member at Berkeley, or people like Amy Dorr, who became Senate chair for UC, who was a faculty member at UCLA, or people like Danny Solorzano, who was also on my committee, or Diego Vigil, a sociologist at UC Irvine, that's where he finished his career. I have always had people influence my career, as has my wife. I entered administration sort of indirectly because of the recommendation of a dean named Cheryl Santos. And Cheryl provided my resume to a president in Texas at Texas Tech University, really without my consent. And I was moved into administration because of it. So I have always had women and women of color and other men that have helped me in my career. And so I feel, as I said earlier, una obligación, I feel obligated to try to create the same opportunities for others. I think all of us, you and I, in positions of some influence, owe that, to continue to create the next generation of leadership that we deserve, and that we have a hand in preparing in the way you and I were prepared by others.
Exactly. What have been some of the guiding principles and values that you've leaned on as you've pursued your career in life?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I will tell you that I was pretty well baked, I suppose. I was pretty well formed when I came into higher education. And so I learned this in where I grew up. Most people know, I grew up in a very poor part of Los Angeles, overwhelmingly Mexicano. And in that environment, I learned character. I learned you keep your word. I learned that you stand up for what's right. I learned about faith. I learned about humility. I've known wonderful, great people who didn't have a lot and changed the lives of others. And so I try to bring those principles to this job: integrity, honesty, humility. I try to bring to this position kindness. I learned kindness in my little neighborhood, in my little barrio. I learned generosity. I learned forgiveness. I think in this line of work, we have to exercise those kinds of virtues, particularly forgiveness. We're all human, and I believe that we all have the best possible intentions, but sometimes our intentions fall short of our objective. And so we should exercise grace and forgiveness as we work together towards some common purpose. And there are many routes to that purpose. We should not become antagonistic because someone sees one route and we see another. Let's try to focus on the prize, as Congressman Lewis would invite us to do. What's the prize? And maybe there are ways for you to get there one way, me to get there another way, and then we meet at the common goal. And so I believe that those are some of the characters, and they're pretty well ingrained in me at this point in time. I don't know. I mean, I like to believe that I continue to be receptive to change and learn, and I have a bad sense of time. So I need to improve my sense of time, because I will just go on and on and on. And I have a sense of urgency that often translates for people into impatience. But I think we have a finite window of opportunity to do some things. And again, pivoting on this principle of sort of obligation or obligación, we have a short window to make a difference. We're obligated to try to make a difference, to create opportunities for others, to be kind and to be considerate, to be humble in that moment, in that opportunity. And so I do have a sense of urgency to complete it during that time when it's available to us. Because I also believe that we are in these positions for a finite period of time. And then it's incumbent upon us to leave it in a better condition for others to carry it further than we could, right? So I have a sense of urgency to leave it for someone else in the way that Dr. Leland and Chancellor Leland and Chancellor Bostrom, and even before them, left it for us to carry a bit further. So I have a sense of urgency and to leave it in a condition for others to carry it further still. So those are some of the characteristics I think I'm probably most recognizable for.
With that sense of urgency that you're describing and the sense of time and the limitations of that, what would you say are your top goals? Short term, let's say your first 90 days, and then longer term.
Right. Well, normally I would have had a number of direct meetings like this with different constituencies. I would have, one of the first meetings, for example, I would have tried to present myself to the faculty and the staff in an in-person meeting. I would have set up a number of meetings with not just the mayor, but all of the city council, all of the county supervisors, local elected officials. Many of these I've done electronically, but normally I would have set up this kind of activity. I would have undertaken a somewhat of a listening tour. I think it's important to listen. Also, I think it's important to act while you're listening. And so I would have undertaken that sort of a normative kind of integration, a transition into a presidency or a new chancellorship. So some of that is taking place, but it's a bit different. My goals, this is a very complicated university. It has a very robust research enterprise. It has the 2020 project, which is coming to some closure, but there are substantial sort of financial sort of arrangements that have to be understood. Assimilating the financial model by which UC Merced is funded by the state, as well as tuition, fees, etc., auxiliaries, familiarizing myself with hiring practices, familiarizing myself with other obligations that the city has made relative to the city and the region, etc. Understanding our enrollment strategy, understanding how to stand up a responsible, safe, defensible response to COVID-19, understanding. So these are all part of my short-term goals, is to assimilate these very, very complex topics. And I'm fortunate that, as I said earlier, presidents and chancellors don't thrive in isolation. We have a wonderful leadership here. We have a very seasoned provost, Dr. Canfield. We have a very accomplished marketing area that you're a part of. We have a chief of staff that is familiar with the office of the chancellor. We have wonderful leadership with Dr. Nice in student affairs. We have a very capable CFO, Mike Riley, Mike McLeod overseeing facilities. So, but also learning the staff is part of the sort of short-term goals. And but in time, I will, and probably in less time than people anticipate. I've done this job before, and under very dire circumstances. In Houston, as you might know, Houston was hit with what is claimed to be the worst natural disaster in American history, Hurricane Harvey, and my campus happened to be in ground zero of the hurricane. And so I've seen very difficult circumstances, but I've also seen a university pull together, pull through, and then make great advances afterward. That's my expectation for UC Merced.
Speaking of that disaster that you were challenged with soon after arriving at the University of downtown, what are some of the lessons that you learned from that experience that you can draw into your challenges now? Exercise
patience, still have a sense of urgency, trust in your staff, trust in the faculty, support students, do what you have to support them at that moment. Don't talk about 6 months from now, we will. I met this young lady who was at an information desk. Her name was Roxanne. This was shortly right after the water had begun to subside, and we were slowly bringing back people to the campus. I asked her, how's it going? She said, it's fine, it's okay. I said, okay. I was trying to be courteous and I started to walk away. Her colleague, I thought she was a staff member. She was, but she was also a student. Her friend at the information desk said, "Don't lie to him, tell him the truth." So I stopped and I said, "Well, what's the truth?" She goes, "Go ahead and tell him." So it turns out that she was one of the many families whose home was completely destroyed, ravaged, was homeless, property destroyed, uh, had doubts, was a student worker and had doubts about her financial aid. We had created an emergency fund, got her some support. We procured a computer for her. We assisted in some of the relocation activities. And, one thing I learned from that exchange was how this young lady was a student and a worker and a mother. And all she wanted to do was relieve the president of the distraction of her personal circumstances and hardship. That's great strength on her part. To not take that moment to communicate her difficulty so that I might focus on others. That kind of strength of character is something I think we should all aspire to, that kind of selflessness. So I learned that people in times of difficulty often put others ahead of themselves. And it's my responsibility and those in leadership at UC Merced to make sure that we put others ahead of ourselves and that we remember the student and the staff and the faculty that are going through this difficulty as well and in their families, and that we don't lose sight of that fact and that we do what's necessary right now to support them. That's what I learned from Harvard.
Given the current crisis that our students are facing, particularly in remote learning and the challenges that come along with that, what do you see the university being able to offer and support for these students during this remote learning experience, particularly first-gen students?
Well, we certainly need to hear from students that are having trouble accessing the internet. Most of the instruction in the fall will be delivered remotely online. We know of some students that live in some areas that may have intermittent access to the internet, may not have reliable access to the internet. All of our instruction is predicated on access to the internet. I have heard, particularly out here in Merced, where there are families in rural communities that don't have towers to bounce the signal. And so these families have to get in their car and drive to an area that receives a signal. I know that Senator Caballero is concerned about with this, as am I, as are other educational leaders, K-12, as well as post-secondary education. So I would encourage students that are having trouble with access, might need a Wi-Fi or a MiFi, a local hotspot, contact the campus. My previous institution, we refurbished hundreds of computers that we were going to replace anyway, and we wiped them and we made them available at a nominal cost. I think it was within a few dollars to some students that needed the technology that was of a sufficient sophistication to access their courses, download documents, etc. And so if students are having trouble, I would hope that they would contact Student Affairs, the Dean of Students, and let's see what we can do to provide them with the resources that they need. I know that we have very generous financial aid packages, that we hope to do some other things to provide some relief to students and their families, and we will do what we can once we learn and what is necessary to help support the students. And I would remind the campus as well, students and faculty and staff. I think one of the things that we have to focus on is trying to get through the fall, right? That there's every reason to believe that the spring will be better. Obviously, it would be a complete conjecture to suggest that spring returns us to normalcy. I don't think that is the case. But let's focus on getting through the fall. Let's hope that the spring is improved in terms of infection rate, hospitalization, mortality rates, that there might be some return to something that resembles some greater degree of normalcy, and then move into the summer. We hope that there's another stimulus package that we hope the Congress sees fit to pass that would provide some additional funding for higher education, somewhere between 46 billion and 29 billion, I believe, in the Senate's current version. The first CARES Act provided over 10 million in support to UC Merced, as well as another 900,000 for minority serving institutions. So this would be also of some benefit to Merced were the next stimulus package passed. So we may be in a position this fall to do even more for students and their families, and to try to get through the fall and into the spring and hope for an improved spring and into the summer.
In addition to the crisis that we're facing in terms of the coronavirus, our country and society in general is going through an evaluation of its history in terms of racial and social justice. In your words, what does social justice mean to you?
Well, I think this is maybe one of the most pivotal moments in our generation in terms of civil rights and social justice and issues of race, class, culture, identity, parity. These are very complicated topics. These are and they shouldn't be. And they shouldn't be. As you know, I lived in Houston, and was witness and participant in several demonstrations and marches asking for greater social justice, greater equity, greater inclusion. You often see that illustration of sort of leveling the playing field, but I know I've met people who they say they were born on third base and they think they hit a triple. And so a parity of opportunity, equal treatment under the law, fairness, that's justice. And so there is no doubt that there has not been equal opportunity, that there has not been an equal application of the law. And so, injustice somewhere is injustice everywhere. And I believe that a university like ours can help train a generation of graduates who have the moral compass and personal ethics to challenge instances of inequity, of injustice, of subordination, of subjugation, of dehumanization, that this is part of what an educated society does. It says that this is intolerable, and I won't be silent, and I will not be silent. And so I think for those of us in these roles, for the short time that we have the privilege to serve in these roles, can't be silent. And UC Merced has a very strong tradition of the issues of social justice and equity and parity. And I hope to continue and improve that tradition with the support and the guidance and insights of our students and our faculty and our staff.
In particular, the Black Lives Movement has led all organizations and institutions of various sizes to question themselves and the roles that they have played. What do you see UC Merced's role being in this movement?
Well, let me just say very clearly, Black lives matter. They matter. They matter to me. I know that they matter to the university, and they will matter in the decisions that we make moving forward. So again, this is one of the areas that I have to become more educated about, having been here just about 3 weeks. But I know that there are groups that have expressed an interest to help the university move forward, and they can absolutely interpret my interest is aligned with their interest to do more to ensure that we're a campus where, in particular, African American students are strongly recruited, highly retained, graduated at the highest possible percentages, and that our faculty reflect the presence of African American scholars and our staff and executive leadership. So one encouraging statistic that I heard recently is from the Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs that oversees enrollment management, is the current percentage African-American applicants to UC Merced is very high, higher than it has been. That's encouraging. Application is encouraging. Okay, enrollment is more desirable, and graduation is the goal. So we need to convert expressed interest into enrollment and graduation. This is what we need to focus on. That's the prize. Not just I want to go to school, but when I come here, I graduate from the university and I go on to do important things. And I credit those important things as being influenced because of my education that was also predicated not just on magnificent pedagogy of faculty, but on principles of equity, inclusion, and social justice. That's also what UC Merced taught me as a graduate.
UC Merced has a diverse student body, particularly among undergraduates. What do you see in terms of what can be accomplished in terms of further diversifying the university? We're in California. We have tremendous gravitas to improve diversity. We're in California, a very diverse state, a state that part of its DNA is a demonstrable recognition of issues of diversity, inclusion, etc. So it should not be difficult to attract applicants, candidates, employees, and students to California and to the UC system, which is generally recognized to be the most distinguished system of higher education in the country, and to a wonderful campus like UC Merced. So I'm very optimistic about moving the needle, okay? And the needle should be visible, okay? We should know if we're moving the needle or if we're not. And this is where a sense of urgency, I think, has resonance in application. We should not be complacent. Not in the University of California, and not in the University of California, Merced. You alluded to recruitment and drawing people to UC Merced. As a new campus and in a part of California that doesn't get a lot of attention, we don't have a large reputation or profile yet. What do you think are some things that we could do to enhance that reputation? Not only in the Central Valley, but beyond. Right.
Well, I think it's important to underscore in a way that we may not have in the past some signature experiences at UC Merced. For example, many are unaware that UC Merced has a disproportionately high amount of undergraduate research. Now, if you talk to colleges, particularly research universities across the country, that's very difficult to accomplish. And yet it's part of the anatomy of UC Merced, undergraduate research. The opportunity to work directly with the faculty member affords you tremendous opportunities beyond the baccalaureate. That's something that we have to do a better job of communicating. The dynamism of our young faculty is something we have to do a better job of communicating. The modernity of our facilities, our labs, the 2020 project is something that we need to better take advantage of in the Central Valley, in Southern California, and in Northern California. When I was in Houston, I made a pledge. I was a bit naive. In West Texas, where I worked for many years, I visited every high school. So when I arrived in Houston, I said, well, I'm going to visit every high school within 100 miles of Houston, or the campus, which was located in downtown Houston. Well, in my previous institution in Texas, that was 4 high schools, maybe 20 within 100 miles. In Houston, it was like hundreds. So I think I got up to about, 4 or 5 dozen in the time that I was there. So I plan to visit high schools, and I plan to directly appeal to students to think about UC Merced differently. I'm very focused on recruiting more students from the Valley. Okay, I'm going to go to these towns. I'm going to Los Baños. I'm going to go to Atwater. I'm going to go to Visalia. I'm going to go to Corcoran. I'm going to go to McFarland. I'm going to go to Stockton and talk to the mayor there about possibly offering courses there. And because I think it's very important that we serve our region. Having said that, we already have a very generous population that come from Los Angeles, where I'm originally from. And I plan to take the case there and improve our recruitment there, as well as Northern California. It's interesting. We have a greater geographic diversity of students at UC Merced than many other of the campuses. I think that's a strength of ours. And with that diversity of student and diversity of faculty and diversity of staff, then we're going to be a campus that can truly talk about not just inclusive sort of representational diversity, but excellence in outcome that leads to a more just society. And so this should be the goal. And it is already underway at UC Merced. My job is to simply enhance that current that has already been started by those that came before me.
You've alluded to how a university can change one's life. And this university in particular is changing this region of the Central Valley. When you drive up Lake Road and you see the new projects coming into shape, it's stunning. But the completion of the 2020 project and the new facilities that you've mentioned, what do you see as some of the biggest concerns about sustainability? Of course, the 2020 project has a great record when it comes to LEED certification and sustainability. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, obviously, we need to be sensitive to the environment. As I said earlier, I think this is part of the DNA of the campus. We not just the LEED certification of the new buildings, but how we interact with the ground that we're located on, how we are careful stewards of the land, how we interact with other developments. Merced, the city, is going to grow. There's going to be additional development, commercialization of property adjacent to the campus in time. There are highway and freeway projects. And so we need to make sure that we're inserting ourselves in an appropriate way to ensure that we're sensitive to the environment, that we're constructing buildings that leave as little of a footprint as possible, that we conserve water and use it wisely, that we have the right light bulbs and that draw down less energy than otherwise. But I don't see, it's interesting. Young people today are much more concerned with the environment and environmental sustainability than I think 50 years ago. And I don't see that changing. And that really gives us an advantage at UC Merced, given how it's been created, right? And particularly with the 2020 project, so sensitive to sustainability, the environment. We have a few solar arrays out. We're talking about more, there's possibility of windmills, et cetera. Not so much in this area, but we might be able to obtain some of the energy that's generated by clean sources. And so I don't see that changing. And it's certainly something we live here. Okay, we need to be good stewards of the land. And I don't see that ever changing as part of one of the characteristics that distinguishes UC Merced from many other schools. And young people will go. I mean, there are students who will predicate their decision of where to attend college on, is the college sensitive to the environment? Is the college cognizant of sustainability issues? And if it is, that's the place that I want to attend school, as well as the kind of complementary academic programs that we might develop in the future to build, to train future engineers, designers, et cetera, that create the new technologies to even further improve our ability to be less damaging to the environment.
In regards to developing these programs, what are your plans for getting us to R1 status?
Well, there are general metrics that are recognized as necessary, whether it's the appropriate proportion of faculty that are hired, the kind of external competitive funding, the sources of that kind of funding, NIH, NSF, et cetera. What the extent of our facilities, the modernity of our facilities, the percentage of grants the kind of indirect costs, or the percentage that the university invests in the research enterprise. So all of these are sort of well known to academic institutions, and UC Merced actually reached R2 status in a meteoric sort of time frame. And so we are well on our way, but the R1 is you have to make the right investments, and those investments will be in the form of faculty. My understanding, for example, this fall class, even in the midst of COVID, that we will have one of the largest hiring cohorts of faculty in UC Merced's history this fall. So you make the investments in faculty, in facilities, grants, internal funding for the research enterprise, graduate students, etc. And those things lead to the publication record and the kind of notoriety that help move you toward becoming recognized by Carnegie and others as a Research One institution. My understanding is also that Santa Cruz was just inducted in the AAU, which then becomes sort of the gold standard recognition for top universities, both public and private in the country.
As a leader in higher education, what changes do you foresee in higher education?
Oh, well, it's interesting. Many people have said something along the lines of what I'm about to articulate, and COVID has it's more than just redesigned higher education. COVID has forced a reconceptualization of how brick and mortar residential campuses like UC Merced can deliver instruction. Now, schools that have a long history of being primarily online have been doing this for years, and brick and mortar campuses like those in the UC, traditional residential universities, have offered some hybridized version of remote instruction for years. We know how to do this very well. But what COVID did to displace the entire university, to think about new technologies, to think about connectivity, to think about asynchronic and synchronic learning, to think about new methods of communicating content, new methods of assessment. I don't believe that those lessons, all of the lessons learned from COVID will disappear in the future of how higher education delivers content, whether it's private or public, or those that have done complete historically remote learning, or brick and mortar traditional universities. The UC is a traditional residential face-to-face brick and mortar system. But how we rethink some of the lessons learned from COVID and the presentation of content, I think will be part of the future of higher education. And then of course, one of the great challenges is how do you build for future populations? There's no doubt that there will be increases in students in higher education in California, in Texas, in Florida, in New York. But how do you accommodate a larger population without having to make maybe the substantial investments in capital construction for brick and mortar classrooms? Is there a way to complement and to create a more democratizing, equitable, accessible education, given what we learned from this pandemic? I think the answer is invariably yes. What that looks like exactly remains to be seen.
You're new to this campus, and there are a lot of faculty who are also new and actually early in their careers. What advice do you have for people early in their careers to keep them both optimistic and engaged?
Well, I think that there's ample reason to be optimistic. First of all, where you're located, at least here at UC Merced, you're located in a town that understands the importance of the university. So we have wonderful town and gown relationships. Okay, so you're located in a state that is still believes in the importance of investing in education. You're part of a system that is still in a very strong position in spite of this very significant downturn in the economy and other issues related to COVID pandemic. You're part of a faculty that's young and dynamic. There are benefits to becoming part of a faculty at a university that's 100 years old. But there are also some intractable traditions, expectations, identities that are part of that century of tradition, of identity. Very infrequently do you have the opportunity to help shape the identity of a university, to help define its traditions, its strengths. This is unusual. And so being part of the faculty here, you have the opportunity to be part of the founding, still at 15 years young, the founding intellectual legacy and history and future of this campus And we're in a very strong position. I would say focus on your research, support your students in your classrooms as much as possible, exercise good self-care, take care of yourselves, take care of your families, and together we will take care of UC Merced.
Because you've had such a long career in academia, can you think of something that you learned from a student that you continue to look to in terms of facing new challenges?
Yes, of course. I've heard some of the best ideas I've ever heard from students. And so I suppose the lesson there is be open to the insights of others, and regardless of their title, their position, or their age. But I also remind students that my understanding is certainly capable of being improved by their insights, as their understanding by my insights. And together, our collective mutual experience hopefully leads to a better outcome. Students are the lifeblood of an institution. They are what courses through us. Faculty and staff are the skeleton. They are the musculature. One can't survive without the other. And so this is what I'm reminded of. Students keep us dynamic and keep us alert. And they keep reminding us of why we are here as part of this university, to serve and to educate them, and have them serve others beyond the institution. So I try not to lose sight of that fact.
So when you're not working, what do you do for fun?
Yeah, I tell you, it's hard. I don't know when I'm never not working. And in this job, there's no Saturday or Sundays, but I enjoy time. I have 3 sons. We play a lot of baseball. So I'm often on a ball field. I throw a lot of BP, and we do a lot of tee work. That's on a hitting tee. I enjoy fishing. I enjoy being outside. My wife and I buy a lot of artwork. The house I'm in doesn't have enough wall space for our artwork. And I enjoy artists. I enjoy creative people. I enjoy disruptive people. I enjoy people that are sort of antagonistic in a very polite and respectful way. I like hearing people that have different ways about thinking of things. I think that's important. So we try to be around art, the theater. I believe in service as well. I believe that you need to go and visit and donate and be around that kind of activity. And one thing that I do that is sort of therapeutic, I barbecue. Now, by barbecue, I don't mean like Mexicano carne asada, because I grew up with carne asada and all of that, and pollo and whatever. When I barbecue, I mean like Texas brisket, ribs, whole chicken, a pork shoulder. And when I barbecue and I smoke food, it's like for 12 hours. So I wake up and I start about 4 in the morning. I'm sure my neighbors are like, what's on fire? But I made some ribs the other day. And so I find being at the barbecue very therapeutic. So that's probably what I do most for fun.
And now I'm hungry. And it is lunchtime, conveniently. So I want to thank you. And thank you to the audience. Thank you for joining us. A reminder that we will have a similar town hall for staff on Thursday at 11 and for faculty on Friday. So with that, I just want to thank you, Dr. Munoz, for sharing your time with us, and welcome again.